All right, so we've got this kind of crazy situation with IShowSpeed. You know the YouTube guy, huge following, like 33 million subscribers.
Yeah, IShowSpeed, he's massive.
Yeah, billions of views on his videos. And he was just in New Zealand, did this whole big trip, training with rugby stars, sparring, the whole 9 yards. But now there's this whole thing about his visa.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like he might have actually broken New Zealand's visa rules.
Yeah.
Which is what we're going to dive into today. Like, did IShowSpeed actually mess up and how?
Interesting. See, this is what's so fascinating about this whole thing with IShowSpeed.
Okay.
It really shows you how much the idea of work is changing, especially with, YouTubers and content creators and all that. We've got this news article from Radio New Zealand. It goes deep into this issue, and it gets pretty complicated.
Yeah, for sure. So just to be clear, he went to New Zealand on a visa waiver. That's usually for tourists, right? People just visiting, not working.
Exactly.
But then he was doing all this stuff that could be seen as work, like training with the Warriors, that big rugby team.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was the sparring session with Dan the Hangman Hooker.
The fighter. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, of course, he was making videos for YouTube the whole time, which is how he earns money, so.
Right, so it's his job.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where it gets tricky, because immigration, New Zealand, INZ, they're really strict about this. You can't just go there on a tourist visa and start working. They have specific work visas for that.
Right, of course. So can you break down exactly what IShowSpeed did in New Zealand that's got everyone talking? Was it just the YouTube videos, or is there more to it?
Well, according to the article, that training with the Warriors, the top-tier rugby team, that could be seen as a promotional activity, especially if it ends up in his videos,
Right, makes sense.
And then the sparring session with Dan the Hangman Hooker, that's another famous fighter. Again, it's kind of like, is he promoting something?
Right, so that's on top of actually making the YouTube videos themselves. And he's earning a living from this, so it's hard to say it's not work.
Exactly, and INZ is very clear about that. They've even issued guidance specifically for remote work. It says individuals require a work visa, or a visa with conditions that allow for work, to engage in activities that result in gain or reward, like getting paid, basically, during their time in New Zealand.
So even if IShowSpeed's income comes from outside New Zealand, just making the videos while he's there could be considered working in the country.
Exactly.
Wow, they're really serious about this. So where does IShowSpeed actually stand in all of this? Like, what's going to happen to him?
That's the big question, isn't it? INZ says they look at each potential visa breach on a case-by-case basis. And so far, they haven't said publicly how many people are in similar situations or what they might do about IShowSpeed specifically.
So it's kind of a waiting game right now.
Pretty much.
Okay, so it sounds like INZ wants to be thorough, but what are they actually looking at when making these decisions? Like, what makes one case more serious than another?
One of the main things they consider is immigration harm. They really focus on cases where there's a high risk of this harm.
Okay.
Which could mean, like, someone taking jobs away from New Zealanders or exploiting workers.
So in IShowSpeed's case, are they trying to figure out if his videos somehow hurt the job market in New Zealand?
It's possible, but INZ hasn't said anything specific about that. They're being pretty tight-lipped about the details. What is worrying is that a lot of influencers and content creators, they might not even realize these visa rules exist. They could be breaking the rules without even knowing it while they're traveling and making content.
Yeah, that's scary. So for anyone listening, if you're making money from your content, you really need to check the visa rules before you even think about going to another country.
Absolutely, 100%. And what's especially tricky is that INZ has said things like writing reviews, even just for a restaurant, or working remotely for an overseas company while on a visitor visa, could be considered breaking the rules.
Wait, so even writing a restaurant review could get you in trouble? Seriously?
Potentially, yes. If you're getting any kind of payment or benefit from that review, INZ might see it as work. And remote work, even for companies outside New Zealand, is a gray area. Even though you're working for a company somewhere else, physically being in New Zealand while you're doing it complicates things.
Wow, this is getting really complicated. Okay, so let's say INZ decides IShowSpeed did break the rules. What could actually happen to him?
Well, the penalties can be pretty serious. Anything from a warning to deportation. He could even be banned from ever going back to New Zealand.
Whoa, that's intense. Deportation for YouTube videos. Do you think INZ is actually going to take action against him?
Hard to say for sure. They haven't made any public statements about his case specifically, but based on everything they've said, it seems like they're really cracking down on these kinds of activities, especially with the rise of social media influencers. and the potential for immigration harm.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. Can you remind us what immigration harm really means?
Sure, it basically refers to any negative impact on New Zealand's immigration system or society as a whole, like undercutting local wages, taking jobs away from citizens, or exploiting workers. INZ is particularly concerned about cases where people are working illegally and potentially taking job opportunities away from New Zealanders.
Okay, so they're weighing the potential harm against the specific circumstances of each case. But this whole situation feels like it points to a much bigger issue. Like the line between work and leisure is getting blurrier, especially in this digital age.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It used to be so clear-cut. You went to work, you came home. But now with the internet and smartphones, work can happen anywhere, anytime. And for content creators, their work is often intertwined with their personal lives and travels.
So how do we navigate this new world where the old definition of work doesn't really apply anymore?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We need clearer guidelines from immigration authorities around the world. But we also need individuals to take responsibility, to understand the rules. It's crucial to research the visa requirements of any country you plan to visit, especially if you're thinking about creating content or doing anything that could be considered work.
This case is a real eye-opener. Content creators and influencers need to be aware of the potential consequences of their actions and make sure they're playing by the rules.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not just about avoiding penalties. It's about respecting the laws of the countries you visit and ensuring you're not contributing to any immigration harm.
So we've got this YouTuber potentially facing deportation for making videos, and it's all raising huge questions about what work even means in the digital age. We'll be right back to unpack all of this further.
And it really makes you think, anyone who travels and creates content, they really need to get a handle on those visa rules wherever they're going.
Yeah, it's definitely a whole other layer of things to think about.
Oh, for sure. So many nuances.
Makes you wonder just how often this kind of thing happens.
Right. And that's a good question. Unfortunately, INZ hasn't said anything publicly about how many people they might be looking into, besides IShowSpeed, or what they might do in those cases.
Okay, so let's say they do decide IShowSpeed broke the rules. What kind of consequences are we talking about here?
Well, the penalties can be pretty serious. It really runs the gamut, from just a warning to actually getting deported. They could even ban him from ever going back to New Zealand.
Wow, that's a pretty wide range of possibilities. Do you think it's likely INZ will actually take action against him?
It's tough to say for sure. They've been keeping the details of his case pretty quiet. But based on everything they've said recently and the actions they've taken, it seems like they're getting stricter about these types of activities, especially as social media gets bigger and bigger, and there's more potential for what they call immigration harm.
Right, you've mentioned immigration harm a few times now. Can we break that down a little? What does that actually mean in this context?
Sure. It basically means any negative impact on New Zealand's immigration system or society as a whole, like undercutting local wages, taking jobs away from New Zealanders, or exploiting workers. Those are all examples. INZ is really concerned about situations where people are working illegally and potentially taking jobs away from citizens or residents.
So in IShowSpeed's case, they're trying to figure out if his activities had any of those negative consequences.
Exactly.
This case really makes you think about the bigger picture, like the line between work and leisure. It's getting so blurry, especially in the digital age.
Absolutely. It used to be so straightforward. You went to your job, you clocked in, you clocked out, you came home. But now with technology, work can happen anywhere, anytime. And for people who create content for a living, their work is often totally mixed in with their personal lives, their travels, their hobbies. And so it becomes even harder to say this is work and this isn't work.
So how do we deal with that? How do we navigate this world where that old definition of work doesn't really apply?
That's a tough question. A lot of people are struggling with that right now. We definitely need clearer guidelines from immigration authorities all over the world. But at the same time, individuals have to take responsibility too. They need to actually understand the rules, do their research before they travel, especially if they're planning to make money or do anything that could be seen as work.
So it's a two-way street. Governments need to step up, but individuals need to be proactive too.
Exactly. Governments have to provide clear guidance, updated guidance, that addresses the realities of digital work. And individuals need to be proactive. Research those rules, understand them.
It sounds like the rise of digital nomads and this whole blurring of the lines between work and leisure is creating a whole set of challenges we're still figuring out.
You're exactly right. And this IShowSpeed situation could really set a precedent for how immigration authorities around the world handle this trend as more and more people work remotely and travel.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
For sure. It raises so many questions, like do we need totally new visa categories, specifically for digital nomads and content creators? Or can we adapt the existing categories to better reflect how people work and earn money these days?
Those are really important questions. And it also makes you think about the role of social media platforms in all of this. Should they be doing more to educate their users about visa requirements and potential legal issues?
That's a good point. Maybe platforms could partner with governments or immigration authorities to provide resources, guidelines, warnings to creators who are traveling, especially if they're planning to make money from their content while they're abroad.
It feels like there's a real opportunity for collaboration here to make sure everyone's on the same page and that creators understand their responsibilities.
I totally agree. It's all about finding that balance, encouraging innovation and creativity in the digital space, but also upholding the rules, protecting everyone involved.
This whole conversation has been really eye-opening for me. What started as a story about a YouTuber maybe having visa issues turned into this much bigger discussion about how we define work, the responsibilities of individuals and governments, and how we adapt to this rapidly changing world.
You've put it perfectly. This case is just one example of how the digital age is forcing us to rethink things, old assumptions, and develop new ways of navigating this increasingly interconnected world.
I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about, especially for anyone who creates content or works remotely while traveling.
For sure. It really emphasizes how important it is to stay informed, be aware of your responsibilities, and understand the potential consequences of your actions in this digital landscape.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but what are the key takeaways for you, the listener? Okay, so let's break it down. What have we learned from this whole IShowSpeed situation? And what does it mean for the rest of us? You know, content creators, digital nomads, anyone who travels and works online.
Right, well, we've got this YouTube star, millions of followers, might have unintentionally broken his visa in New Zealand by doing things that could be considered work, training with a rugby team, sparring with a fighter, and of course, making those YouTube videos. It really brings up this bigger question. How do we define work these days, especially in the world of online content creation?
Yeah, and it's not just the big stuff, like you were saying. Even something as simple as posting a restaurant review could get you in trouble if you're getting paid for it.
Exactly. It all comes down to understanding those visa rules. And they're different for every country. What's okay in one place could be a big no-no somewhere else.
So even if you're not a huge influencer like IShowSpeed, you still need to be really careful about what you're doing online and how you're earning money, especially when you're traveling.
Absolutely. And it's not just about avoiding those penalties. It's also about being respectful, respecting the laws of the countries you visit, and making sure you're not negatively impacting their workforce.
So what does all this mean for the future? For content creation, for digital nomads, for international travel? Are we going to see a world where influencers need special visas just to film a travel vlog?
It's a really interesting question. This case could definitely push governments to create clearer guidelines, maybe even entirely new visa categories, specifically for digital nomads and content creators. We might also see social media platforms getting more involved, educating their users about visa rules and potential legal issues.
It seems like those lines between work and leisure, they're only going to get blurrier.
I think so.
So we all need to adapt, both individuals and governments.
Exactly. We need to find that balance,
Yeah.
encourage the growth of the digital economy, but also make sure our immigration systems are fair and effective.
Well, this has definitely been a thought-provoking deep dive. I know I'll be double-checking those visa rules before my next trip.
That's a good idea. Always better to be safe than sorry.
So for everyone listening, here's something to think about. What are the wider implications of this whole situation? For content creation, for international travel, will we see specialized visas for influencers? Will social media platforms step up and take more responsibility? These are big questions.
They really are. Important questions to consider as our world becomes more and more digital, more and more interconnected.
This deep dive has definitely been an eye-opener. Thanks for joining us. And be sure to check back for more deep dives into the topics that matter.
It's been a pleasure. Remember, knowledge is power, especially in today's world.